Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Cason Wallace with Rylan Stiles of the Locked On Thunder podcast. Going to be talking about what we saw out of him during his time with the Wildcats, what we will see with him during his time with the Thunder. Also going to be discussing some different Kentucky players on the Thunder's roster, just to kind of have some fun with it. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everybody out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, it would mean a ton if you went ahead and subbed there. If you're listening on podcast, please follow along wherever you're listening, and please leave a review for the show. Before we get into it, I want to say a couple of different things here for you guys. Number one, I have been sick ever since I got back from SEC Media Days in Nashville. My voice has been absolutely shot, so I apologize for not getting an episode up yesterday. But we will have an episode every single day of the week here for the rest of the week. And then once August hits, we will officially be back to 5 days a week, so no longer 3 days a week here for the months of June and July. Just wanted to give you guys an update. They are still kind of under the weather, but we are powering through it and having some fun here as we get closer and closer to fall camp. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Rylan Stiles.
What were the expectations coming into last season for Cason Wallace at Kentucky?
Well, I think that he ended up projecting out kind of where he started, whenever he committed to the Wildcats, which was somewhere in the lottery. You really liked his defense coming out of high school. I said that he may be one of the best on-ball perimeter defenders, defenders, period, heading into the college basketball sphere last year. And I think he really did show that throughout his time at Kentucky. That was the expectation, was for him to be a lengthy combo guard that Benson was kind of steady. And whenever he got to Kentucky, I think you really got to see that unfold. I was very excited, very high, Rylan, on Cason Wallace coming out of high school. In fact, I continued to say before Kentucky even tipped off their first game of the season last year, I continued to say he may already be my favorite player. And as the season progressed, I continued to harp on the fact that, Cason, while there were some shortcomings, there were some inconsistencies, I still really, really liked his game overall because of how he carried himself. And coming out of high school, you saw a lot of those similar things just simply carry over. I don't want to say that he has not changed, because I think that he has developed. And during his season at Kentucky, things definitely, I think, changed for the better. But coming out of high school, man, he was tabbed as what I think we still see today, just a very strong defender that's a very steady presence, I feel like, on the court.
So then we enter the season come November, and what did you first see from him? Because I know that his season was kind of split maybe into like two parts at Kentucky.
Yeah, so for the first few games of the season in that non-con slate, I can't remember exactly how the games broke down, but you saw Kentucky really struggling out the gate against a couple of different opponents. Gonzaga, Michigan State, that was a game I got to see in person, and I got to watch Cason alongside some of Kentucky's other guards really struggle under pressure. That's kind of what my first impressions were of him. Is like, man, although he has been just kind of a steady hand, whenever it gets to crunch time, whenever it gets to, okay, the offense has got to find a way to get a bucket here, whether it be to get back into the game, whether it be to hold off an opponent, whether it be to prevent Kentucky from going into double overtime against Michigan State. And guys like Wallace, whenever they were given their opportunities, they weren't able to execute. And I believe you saw it in different games like Gonzaga. I think Michigan was a game where Kentucky just really couldn't get any offense going, and Wallace had a hand in that. It's just in that non-conference slate, I think we saw a lot of growing up from various players on Kentucky's squad, but I think Cason was definitely one of the people that fans criticized the most because he was not able to kind of get things going relative to the rest of his game throughout the rest of the game, which would always be solid. I think it would always be fun to watch if you really love defense, and there would be the occasional flashes of, dunks on fast breaks and such. But I just really saw a lack of confidence, it felt like, whenever Kentucky needed him to perform in the clutch. And to be honest with you, I don't really know if that's what his game is, but I think we got to see that kind of change as the season went along.
So we saw that first half of the season kind of progress, and then it eventually led up to some injuries that he dealt with, and kind of how that changed his game. His role changed as well, and it all went to a moment at the end of the NCAA tournament against the Thunder's 50th overall pick, and an exciting game there against Kansas State. So there's obviously a lot to get to on today's show, but I do want to tell you right now about our good friends over at FanDuel, folks, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On and Major League Baseball at FanDuel.com. You go there right now, FanDuel.com/LockedOn, and you can start your first swing at betting on MLB. And you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. So if you just bet $20, you can land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So that's $200 for you to spend on anything from the money line, over under, projection, prop bets, anything you want to. And the app is safe, secure, and it's super easy to use. Plus, you get paid instantly. It's that easy to use over there. There's no better place to bet on MLB or any other sport at FanDuel.com/LockedOn, America's #1 sportsbook. Go there right now, FanDuel.com/LockedOn, to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. And right now, you can just simply type that in and bet on baseball with the Angels heading to Detroit as 1.5 run underdogs. I'd take that bet against Detroit. So go there right now, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. For your second listen, check out Locked On Kentucky, check out Locked On NBA. And Lance, we're talking Cason Wallace's career at Kentucky. So let's start this next segment with the on-ball, off-ball nature of his offense. Which did you think that he was more comfortable in, thrived in more, and when did that kind of flip happen, and why did the flip happen for Kentucky?
So you have to look at the injuries, I think, whenever you talk about, what was better, what was more comfortable, what wasn't. So for the first half of the season, through that non-conference slate, I mean, statistically, I think Kentucky kind of utilized him both ways. I think they tried to kind of figure out what he was most comfortable with. Severe Wheeler had been Kentucky's starting, one for the past couple of seasons. And I think Kentucky was, mostly running the offense through him. But whenever Wheeler kind of went out with an injury, Wallace had to step in. And I think statistically there were a few games where he was impressive. And offensively, I mean, he was a really solid shooter for the first half of the season. And then the injuries started to pile up. And I think Kentucky started to use him a little bit more off ball, it felt like at times. And his numbers dropped, I think, considerably. And you go and look at his game logs from LSU, which was the second conference game of the season, all the way until the end of the year. He went from overall, he's like a 34% three-point shooter, 22.7%. He shot 40.6% from the field. He averaged more turnovers, less points. I mean, the injuries really took a toll on him, and Kentucky was shifting him around with everybody and their mother on this roster. I mean, there were a lot of different injuries for Kentucky. At one point, they had their starting shooting guard / backup 3 as their point. At one point, they had their power forward for different sets, running point guard in Jacob Toppin, who is now with the Knicks. They really struggled to find a way to direct their offense comfortably. And Wallace was just one of those guys that wasn't 100% and wasn't able to go out there, I think, at times and execute the way that he would have liked to. And that's kind of what we were saying about him heading into this draft, Rylan, is that, I really wish we could have seen this Kentucky team healthy, especially with guys like him, to see what he did in both areas. You talk about the on-ball offense. I was very impressed with his vision and with his anticipation, I think, for different sets that Kentucky wanted to run. I liked his passing. Tai Tai Washington a year ago, I think, was very similar in the fact that they just knew where to get the ball and they knew how to, rack up some assists at times. And Wallace also, I think, was a little bit more aggressive, I think, on ball than what you may see out of some of Kentucky's guards over the past couple of years, just simply because of his size. I was impressed with his ability to get into the lane. I liked his floater game. I liked what he did getting into the rim. And then off ball, I was less impressed, I think, with what Cason Wallace did. If my memory serves me correctly, watching them game in and game out, I preferred Wallace with the ball in his hands as opposed to waiting for somebody to get it to him, because I felt like he was more in control of what was going on than any other player that Kentucky had on roster. So again, they kind of mixed some things up. They kind of shuffled some things around. Statistically, you saw a dip once he got hurt after that non-con slate. I mean, obviously it gets tougher once you start to play in the SEC, but man, injuries, rotation issues, the coaching staff really struggling to find an answer and putting Cason and alongside other guards in uncomfortable situations. It just led to a lot of inconsistency. And I would have preferred, if healthy, Wallace had been Kentucky's one from day one.
Yeah, it's very interesting as like a talking point for what Cason can do. I think that one of the kind of appeals for him for OKC is that versatility, that he's capable of playing on and off the ball. Obviously, the Thunder are very guard heavy, and so I think that whenever you watch Cason this summer league, even, you saw some moments where against Dallas in his debut, he really thrived as a catch and shoot 3-point shooter off the ball. He went 6 for 10 from beyond the arc in that one. He finished his summer league after 5 games shooting just below 40% from three, 38% from three for his summer league stats over those 5 games after that tremendous outburst against Dallas. And then he's actually it was kind of the reverse for him. He struggled a little bit on ball, trying to navigate the pick and roll against bigger, taller defenders than you see in college, and really was able to help himself out off ball because he had that catch and shoot shot going a little bit. So whenever you envision Cason Wallace in the NBA offensively, because we know we're going to get to that defense here in a second, which is where he's going to make his money. Offensively, would you rather see him as someone who you trust to pass the baton to, let him lead your second unit as the main ball handler, or would you rather see him kind of complement other stars in this league?
I think that it's a really interesting point, and one that I was going to get to here in a second, just because of how Kentucky's roster is so different than the situation he's going to enter at OKC. And you got to see, like you mentioned in the summer league, the debut, he goes off. He had a half court shot going in. Everything was falling for him in that first game against Dallas. And you got to see Wallace healthy with a competent, healthy team alongside him play very well off the ball. And it's something that almost kind of surprised me. But whenever you think about it, whenever you think about a situation and you go back and actually watch some of the games, you begin to understand, okay, it's simply a different landscape. And it's one that allows Wallace now to kind of open things up and really show his ability. I think when you look at him offensively for the Thunder, because of how guard heavy they are, you've got guys like Shea on roster. Absolutely let him run at the 2. Let him play some defense, and then let him be somebody that can run off ball. Now, is that to say he can't run an offense? No. But again, you look at the Thunder's roster, completely different than one Kentucky had a season ago, obviously, because it's a professional roster. But you've got better ball handlers. You've got better guys that can set you up. I think Wallace will be best served as somebody with OKC, as someone that can be that catch and shoot type of guy, can be that dude that gets you a couple of steals a game, that plays hard defense against other star guards in this league. I would say he's almost like a Drew Holiday type of player, except he's not going to be as on the ball as much as Drew. Maybe that's a bad comp. I don't study the NBA as hard as I do the college game, but I feel like there are some similarities to be had there in the fact that he can get you some defense, and then on top of that, he can get you some buckets on occasion. And I think that to answer your question again, I think that he would be best served in a role at the 2, but he can do both.
So the last question about his offense before he transitioned to his defense, in your opinion, you watch his game and you watch, both seasons, and you're telling the story of Kentucky's season. from November to the end of January, so like the first half of the year, kind of, he shot 40% from three.
Mhm.
And then he ends the year and his season total from three is 34.6% from three, which obviously does not suggest great things in the second half of the year after shooting 40% from three. Uh, what what went into that? Is it as simple as like, hey, he had some back issues at that point, and then the 3-point shot kind of went down? Is there more of a fluke nature to his three? How would you summarize his shooting ability?
I would summarize his shooting ability as, to be honest with you, more comfortable in the catch and shoot. I did not really see a lot of things off the dribble that impressed me with Cason last season. And again, I think OKC is going to be fine with that because of who they have that can do that for them. But I was more impressed with what he was able to do, kind of sticking to his spot and shooting. And I don't mean like he can't dribble around a screen, stop and shoot a three. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that I just was not impressed with him on the move, getting a shot up, especially from distance. I was not impressed with that consistently. You mentioned the injuries, and I think that was something that came into play as the season went along. If I'm not mistaken, it was a back injury for Kaysen that just really was a struggle for him. And then you look at his game logs, it was shooting less and making less during the SEC slate. So it wasn't like he was just chucking up more threes, trying to get more shots up, or it wasn't like he was just shooting absolutely nothing. He was shooting about a three less a game during the conference slate there. And pair that with the injuries, pair that with the awkward rotations, it left Kaysen, I think, in a spot where he could not show what he was truly capable of, and it was not setting him up to succeed in the areas that he could really succeed in. So that's kind of what I would describe. That's how I would describe his shot making ability. Is just I think better in the catch and shoot, better not on the move, and then statistically breaking it down. I don't really think that there was a whole lot that he could have done differently to have changed how things progressed last season, which was just kind of a slow decline.
Coming up, we're going to talk about Cason Wallace's defense. That is going to be his bread and butter in the NBA. What stood out the most on the defensive end of the floor for Cason Wallace at Kentucky? Plus, we're going to have some curveballs at the end of this because there's a lot of Kentucky guards on this Thunder roster currently, including we're going to discuss the tournament game against Keontae Johnson and Kansas State, all coming up on today's Locked On Thunder podcast. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. Subscribe for free across all podcasting platforms so you never miss an episode. You everydayers have already gotten a review of Marketing His Contract Extended, Team USA selections for Chet and J-Dub, plus a roster projection and a mailbag podcast. Now you're getting this great podcast with Lance of Locked On Kentucky to discuss Cason Wallace in depth. And let's start there again with Cason Wallace defensively. What part of his defense stood out the most to you when you're sitting there and you're watching every single minute of Kentucky basketball? You're probably watching the games multiple times. Like, what stood out the most to you as just, oh yeah, he excels at this defensively?
I think that there are different types of defenders across the board. You've got the guys that are kind of like the scrappy, kind of like, fighting hard because they don't necessarily have the size or the ability. They're just kind of overcommitting to things. You've got guys in the NBA that are just physically dominant and just kind of impose their will. And then you've got guys like Cason Wallace, who, again, I want to go back to just, and you have to actually watch it to understand the steady presence. You talk about guys that have strong upper body control and are able to kind of move and glide. I think on offense and on defense, I think somebody that's very popular that I think has great body control is Chris Paul, somebody that's able to move with the ball really, really well. But whenever you talk about guys on defense with their body control, I mean, it's another level. And to see guys like Cason Wallace stick with their man, just kind of glide smoothly, move along with them. He never got lost. He never overcommitted. He never got antsy. He never got jittery or energetic or overly energetic on defense. It was just, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. Where are you going? And it was just really impressive to see him never break down as a freshman, as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, never break down, or at least not consistently, against his man. And that's the type of defender I think that you're going to be really excited about moving to the NBA. But it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to prevent you from getting a shot up. I'm not sitting here saying he was stoic, like he wasn't reaching for steals or anything like that. He averaged 2.5 a game in the non-con slate, finished this year averaging 2. But I really like the presence of Cason Wallace on the court because of how it's just kind of, you know, how some corners in the NFL are just like overly energetic and talk, but then there are some guys that just, they don't say anything. They go out there, they go about their work, and they get stuff done. That's the type of guy Cason Wallace is, where it's just quiet, efficient defense. And when you talk about what he does on ball, again, it's just you don't really see guys breaking him down often. And when you talk about the perimeter defense, you know, it's just you don't see guys getting off shots against him often. It goes back to the 6'4" length. So he's the perfect combo guard. He's the perfect defender that you're going to want out there. And whenever you see him actually develop and get some years in the league, I think he has the ability to form into one of the NBA's best if he's able to get that type of time.
That is going to be very exciting. And I think that we saw that a little bit in Summer League, where no matter who he was tasked with matching up with, it felt like he played at their pace of if he was a really fast guy, he somehow still kept up with them and was right in front of him. If he was a very slow, methodical guy, he still was able to be on balance and against that, you know, right in front of that player. So the defense there was great. In your opinion, how many positions can Cason Wallace guard in the NBA?
2, comfortably 3 if needed. I think that you could see him easily, you know, get 1 and 2, and he can handle a forward or a wing. I would not stretch him down to a guy that's 6'7". I just wouldn't put him in that type of matchup, because at that point you're concerned about, you know, just physically being overpowered. And it truly just depends on the style of player at the 3. If you've got somebody that's more of you know, a fluid ball handling type of forward, type of 3 wing type of guy, absolutely. Let's see if we can try it out, put him on him. I think Cason Wallace could handle him, but not as good as he could handle 1 and 2. So 1 through 2, yes. Put him on a wing if you need to. I would not go to that matchup to begin with, though. That's not where I would feel comfortable.
That is all great stuff. Now, the Kentucky season ended against Kansas State, and it was a magical Kansas State run. Their team was basically all transfers, and they were able to go a long way. But it was a matchup between Cason Wallace and Keontae Johnson, and Sam Presti was in the arena, and he ended up drafting both of those players. What do you remember from that game? And is there anything specific from Cason's game or even Keontae Johnson's game that you remember from that contest?
Yeah, I remember Cason going off. He was like 9 of 11 in that game, and was an absolute bucket getter for a Kentucky team that, again, just was devoid of offense at times. And what I remember from that game was Kansas State. This is just going to be me complaining here for a second. I remember Kansas State getting to the rim and not being able to finish in the first half, getting to the rim in the second half and hitting really tough shots, and then hitting some bomb threes, one of them from Johnson, maybe a couple of them from Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, just to kind of seal the deal against the Wildcats, against the Kentucky Wildcats, I should say, considering they're both Wildcats. But I remember Cason just kind of getting what he wanted to inside the arc, whether it be the floater, whether it be getting to the rim and finishing with layups. And I believe he only had 1 or 2 3-point attempts that game. I don't have that pulled up, but I think he might have made the only shot he took from outside the arc. So I just remember Cason just getting into the paint and just kind of overpowering people, and that was impressive to see from a guard that, you know, did not do that a ton, but showcased the ability to. And I hate the fact that Kentucky lost that game. I feel like there were a lot of things that were going against both of those teams, actually, because of the facility and the weirdness of like having to like rework the goals because apparently something was broken, and just not a lot of great shooting, I think, from both sides. And so I just remember a lot of negative things from that game, but Cason Wallace was definitely a bright spot.
You nailed it. In that game, Cason, 21 points, and he had 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. He did go 1 for 1 from outside, and inside, he shot 81% from the floor on his way to 21 points. That's very incredible in that loss to Kansas State. And he only scored more than that twice, and it was once against Florida A&M, but once against Arkansas. So that was an impressive game. Arkansas had a lot of quality NBA prospects on their roster. So how often would you say that Cason went and just was able to transform into this bucket getter? Because I think that it would be good for Thunder fans to know that or see that, because in summer league, it's kind of different. You're trying to find your footing in the NBA. You're trying to you kind of play within your system, play within your team, and you're just kind of all new and stuff. So whenever Cason was in opportunities to play in summer league, just kind of by himself almost, where he was like one of the only premier guys on the court because everyone else was resting, he kind of struggled a little bit offensively. What did it look like whenever you stripped down the parts of Kentucky and it was like his team? How did he go about getting those buckets?
I think that it's kind of reflective to be honest with you, what you saw in that Kentucky Kansas State game. You go and pull up that shot chart, and you'll notice he took 2 mid-range jumpers, both of which that he missed. He made all of his shots in the paint, and he made that 1-3 from outside the arc. Cason Wallace at his best is somebody that works inside the paint and inside the arc, and is able to occasionally get a 3-point shot up, selective 3-point shooting, so that he can be efficient in that area. And it's just kind of blowing by guys. Arkansas, Florida, Missouri, Auburn, those are a few different teams that Cason Wallace, I think, was really good against last season, just looking at his game logs. And scoring-wise, a lot of those games, you look at what he was able to do, it was a lot of inside-the-arc shots. Outside of the Missouri game where he ended up taking 13 3-point attempts, but let's not talk about that. I was impressed with what Cason was able to do, getting past quick teams and just kind of outmaneuvering them, I think, at times on offense with his speed. And Kentucky was able to do that at different times with their transition offense a season ago. But Wallace at his best was a selective 3-point shooter, somebody that utilized his floater game really, really well. And I want to emphasize really well. He was really able to get those shots going consistently, and somebody that was able to kind of flow with the pace of the other team at times. And we talked about that with his defense. I think you could also see that out of his offense as well whenever he was clicking.
I know you're very busy. You got a lot going on, especially with football season right underway. You cover 2 SEC programs, so you are truly SEC ready. We're hoping that Oklahoma is SEC ready around these parts. But I appreciate your time. Let's wrap it up here with, in your mind, how good can Cason Wallace be?
I think that he can be a starting combo guard in the NBA, depending on the team that he sticks with, whether that be the Thunder, whether that be elsewhere. He can be a starting 2 guard. He may not be statistically the most dominant player, but I think his ceiling is is definitely making some all defensive teams here in the future, and just kind of being a mainstay. If he's able to get his scoring ability up a little bit, just a little bit, I think that he's a second or third all NBA type of player every other year.
And then the Thunder also roster SGA, who we know is a superstar, but Tai Tai Washington was also dumped off to OKC, and
Yes,
he's going to go into the training camp and try to battle for a roster spot. Maybe he earns one. Maybe he is off somewhere else as well. But what is your take on Tai Tai Washington, having seen him at Kentucky, and then of course seeing the start to his kind of rocky NBA career in a weird organization in Houston?
Yeah, Washington, I think is a couple of different things. I don't think he's as defensively dominant, but nowhere near as dominant as Cason Wallace is. But I think they're very similar in the way that they distribute the basketball. Both very calm presences. I think that Washington was a better 3-point shooter with the ball in his hands. I think he was good catch and shoot, but I also think he was really good, off the dribble shooting, whether that be the mid-range or whether that be outside the arc. So I think Washington is a little bit more fluid in his game and is similar because of the fact that they both have similar stature, same program, both combo guards. I think he's probably, if you had to, let's just say, and this is not going to happen, let's just say you put them both out there on the court at the same time, Washington would be your 1 and Wallace would be your 2. I'll just say that.
I like that. And then one last one, just a softball for you about SGA. Did Kentucky fans, whenever he was at Kentucky, like, did they realize he could be this? Like, he could be like a 30-point per game, first team All NBA, top 5 MVP voting guy?
I want to say no. I want to say no, just because I think that this is where I'll leave this. Look at some pictures of his frame at Kentucky and look at his frame now, And if you had told Kentucky fans, hey man, this is what he's going to look like in 7-8 years, I think people would be like, oh, well, then he's definitely going to be this, that, or the other. But because of just how just different he looked, and also I think that his game just simply hadn't evolved in terms of offensively what he was able to do. If you had shown them a picture of him now, I think a lot of people would have jumped on the train. All right, that was our conversation with Rylan Stiles of the Locked On Thunder podcast, almost to the Locked On Kentucky podcast. Really appreciate Rylan having us on to talk about Cason Wallace. If you have any thoughts on Cason Wallace and how he performed, Tai Tai Washington, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if you want to talk about him as well in the YouTube comments below, you can do so, or you can hit us on the socials. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. On tomorrow's episode, we will be discussing a question that I have kind of tackled a couple of different times on the show, but I really want to focus on it. A question that may be difficult for some to debate over. Is Reed Sheppard better than Rob Dillingham? I'm going to be talking about that on tomorrow's episode. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDaw_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.